I need to inform you that I've found someone more suitable for my future. I won't be attending our wedding next month. I wish you success in your endeavors." That was the entire message from Marcus, sent at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, exactly 32 days before our wedding. I stared at my phone, the quarterly reports from our care facility lying untouched on my desk as my world tilted sideways. 3 years together, 8 months of engagement, and countless I love yous all dismissed in 3 clinical sentences. My name is Evelyn Mitchell, and I'm a 32-year-old healthcare facility owner in suburban Boston. Until that morning, I thought I was living the dream, a successful elder care business, a beautiful office in our newly renovated facility, and engaged to a man I believed was my soulmate. Marcus and I met at a healthcare industry conference where his medical equipment company was a major sponsor. He swept me off my feet with his industry knowledge, apparent compassion for patient care, and what I mistook for genuine dedication to improving healthcare outcomes. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. The expensive medical equipment he pushed our facility to purchase despite our budget constraints, the late-night vendor meetings that left his collar smelling of unfamiliar perfume, the way he'd become defensive whenever I questioned certain charges on our joint business consulting account. But love has a way of making you ignore red flags, doesn't it? Even when they're waving right in front of your face, especially when they're disguised as care for your patient's well-being. Have you seen this? I texted Diana, my best friend and healthcare consultant, forwarding Marcus's message. Her response was immediate, "Don't move. I'm leaving my morning meeting right now." Diana found me still sitting in my office, now surrounded by wedding invitation samples that had arrived that morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Join us in celebrating our commitment to care," printed in elegant silver foil on cream paper, while my phone displayed the death certificate of our relationship. What kind of coward breaks up through a message? Diana's voice shook with anger. "After everything you've done to help his career in medical sales?" She was right about that part. I'd helped Marcus secure contracts with several elder care facilities in our network, introduced him to key decision-makers, and even postponed expanding our own facility so he could focus on launching his new medical equipment line. But here's what Marcus didn't know: I wasn't as naive as he assumed. For the past 3 months, I'd been quietly documenting his suspicious activities. The state-of-the-art medical equipment he'd gifted our facility, supposedly a special deal through his company, I'd already discovered was marked up significantly above market rate, and I'd documented all the irregularities. The money from canceling those orders was sitting in a separate account, waiting for what I hadn't been sure until now. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by something sharper, more focused. Marcus thought he could simply message his way out of our life together. He was about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating a woman who manages healthcare facilities for a living. The weeks leading up to Marcus's message had been filled with signs I couldn't ignore anymore. Like how he'd started taking calls in the parking lot, his voice dropping to a whisper, or the way his stories about vendor meetings didn't align with facility records. Business dinners at medical conferences that weren't actually happening, meetings with hospital boards that didn't exist on any calendar. Each suspicious moment felt like a small crack in our foundation, irritating but not quite severe enough to warrant a complete structural review. I'd met Marcus's parents several times, both of them proud of their son's success in medical sales. His mother Susan had accompanied me to look at wedding venues, tearing up as we toured a beautiful converted historical hospital that cost more than my first year's business lease. His father James had pulled me aside at our engagement party, telling me how happy he was that Marcus had finally found someone who understood the healthcare industry. Now I wondered if they knew about their son's double life, or if they were as deceived as I had been. Looking back, the changes began around March. Marcus started working later, claiming his company was handling a major hospital merger. But one night, I'd run into his colleague Mike at a medical suppliers conference. Merger? We haven't had any major hospital contracts since January, he'd said, confusion clear on his face. When I mentioned this to Marcus, he'd accused me of undermining his professional relationships, turning it around so somehow I was the one breaching trust. That night, I couldn't sleep while Marcus snored beside me. I opened my laptop, accessing our facility's vendor database, something I'd never thoroughly investigated before. His company's password was still our facility's registration number, which should have been a compliance red flag, but now felt like pure negligence. What I found made my stomach churn: emails to hospital administrators about exclusive supply contracts in Chicago, searches for healthcare facility management positions in the Midwest, and most telling, dozens of messages to someone named Sophia Anderson, the administrative director at St. Mary's Hospital. "I can't stand the guilt anymore," one email read. "Evelyn deserves better than this, but I can't help how I feel about you. The contracts we could build together." The timestamp showed 3 a.m., sent on a night he'd told me he was at an emergency suppliers meeting. That's when I decided to cancel the equipment orders. I remembered how proud he'd been presenting the contracts to our board, spinning a story about exclusive rates and cutting-edge technology that would revolutionize our patient care. The truth emerged when I had our financial team audit the proposals. The equipment was overpriced by nearly 40%, with kickbacks cleverly hidden in maintenance contracts. The $300,000 we saved by canceling became my insurance policy against whatever storm was coming. Diana's voice pulled me back to the present. "Earth to Evelyn," she said, waving a hospital acquisition proposal in front of my face. "What do you want to do about the medical conference next week? The venue deposit? The vendors?" I took a deep breath, my mind surprisingly clear. "First, I need to make a phone call," I said, pulling up the contact information for Thomas Hayes, a private investigator who specialized in healthcare fraud, recommended by a colleague who dealt with similar vendor issues. Then we're going to find out exactly who this more suitable person is, and what else our star medical equipment salesman has been hiding. Meeting Thomas Hayes felt surreal. His office was nothing like the dim, smoky spaces you see in movies. Instead, it was modern, bright, and professional, much like a high-end medical practice. He listened intently as I laid out what I knew, taking notes on a sleek tablet. "So these joint consulting charges," he said, gesturing at the bank statements I'd brought. "These expenses here, $48,000 in medical equipment demonstrations, $32,000 in client relationship building, none of these were legitimate business expenses?" "Not a single one," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "And they all occurred on days he claimed to be at medical conferences or supplier meetings that didn't exist." Thomas nodded, his expression professional yet focused. "And you mentioned he's planning something in Chicago's healthcare sector?" That's what his emails suggested, but I only saw glimpses before I stopped searching. I didn't want to compromise any potential investigation. I pulled out the documentation I'd gathered. "I have $300,000 from the canceled equipment orders. Will that be enough?" "More than enough," Thomas assured me. "I'll start with his medical supply chain records and recent hospital contracts. Give me a week." That week felt like the longest of my life. I threw myself into managing our facility, grateful that elder care administration required enough focus to keep my mind occupied. My staff never suspected that their usually composed director was tracking her fiancé's betrayal between care plan reviews and staff meetings. Then Thomas called. "Can you meet today?" His office felt smaller somehow as he spread documents across his desk, photos of Marcus entering high-end restaurants with an elegant woman in hospital administrator attire, the same woman getting into his car, receipts for medical conferences they'd attended together, equipment contracts with inflated prices. Her name is Sophia Anderson, Thomas explained. She's the administrative director at St. Mary's Hospital. They've been seeing each other since March, when your facility signed that major equipment contract. March. The month everything started changing. There's more, Thomas continued, pulling out financial records. Mr. Crawford has been operating well beyond ethical boundaries. Kickbacks, inflated contracts, even some questionable medical equipment certifications. It seems he's been using your facility's reputation to secure contracts with both relationships. My hands shook as I looked through the evidence. Marcus had leveraged our facility's name to win contracts worth millions, while using the profits to wine and dine Sophia. The Chicago plans weren't just about love. He was running from impending medical fraud investigations, planning to start fresh with Sophia in a new healthcare market. What are my options? I asked. Thomas leaned back in his chair. Well, that depends on what you want. We have enough here to trigger several medical board investigations. His company has strict policies about disclosure and kickbacks. We could also ensure Sophia sees these fraudulent contracts and certification reports. Or, I prompted. Or we could do something more strategic. Make him face everything at once: his lies, his fraud, his carefully constructed medical supply empire. But it would need to be handled carefully. I thought about Marcus's dismissive message, his casual cruelty in discarding our relationship and potentially endangering patient care with substandard equipment. A plan began forming in my mind. Tell me more about being strategic, I said. The first phase of my plan started with a simple message to Marcus: I accept your decision. I just need you to come sign off on some facility equipment contracts. His reply was almost insultingly quick: I'll send my assistant next week. No, I responded. There are regulatory compliance documents you need to review personally. Friday at 6. While waiting for Friday, I stayed busy. Thomas had discovered that St. Mary's Hospital had strict policies about vendor relationships, and guess whose company had just signed a major exclusive supply contract with them? I also learned that Marcus's boss Richard was obsessive about ethical compliance, especially after a recent healthcare fraud scandal at their firm. I invited Diana over to help me prepare the documentation. We arranged everything meticulously: printouts of his secret emails with Sophia, bank statements showing his kickback schemes, equipment contracts with inflated prices, and photos from Thomas's surveillance, all organized in professional-looking folders with regulatory compliance labels. At 5:55 p.m. on Friday, the elevator dinged. I opened my office door to find not just Marcus, but Sophia beside him. My heart lurched, but I kept my expression professionally neutral. She was elegant, I had to admit, with the polished look of a high-level hospital administrator, though now looking distinctly uncomfortable. I thought it would be better if we were honest about everything, Marcus said, his usual sales confidence wavering slightly at my lack of reaction. Sophia wanted to be perfect. I cut him off. You're both here. Come in. They followed me into the conference room where Richard, Marcus's boss, was already sitting with our facility's compliance officer. The color drained from Marcus's face. Richard? What are you? I invited them, I said calmly. Since we're being honest about everything. Those folders contain your regulatory documents. Feel free to review them. Sophia reached the first folder before Marcus, pulling out the equipment contracts and certification reports. Her professional composure cracked as she read through them. What is this? She demanded, turning to Marcus. These equipment prices are inflated by 40%. You said all these contracts were at preferred vendor rates. You said your relationship with Evelyn's facility was purely professional. There's more, I interrupted, gesturing to the other folders. Like the records of how he used my facility's reputation to secure your hospital's contracts, and documentation of how he violated both companies' compliance agreements. Oh, and Sophia, your hospital board might be interested in these vendor relationship violations. Richard stood up, his face thunderous. Crawford. My office, 8 a.m. Monday. Bring your registration papers and licenses. This isn't what it looks like, Marcus stammered, but Richard was already walking out with our compliance officer. Sophia grabbed her designer briefcase, tears threatening to ruin her perfect makeup. You told me you were just a supplier to this facility. That she was just a business connection you were ending. You said the Chicago position was already arranged. She stopped, mascara running, and rushed out. Marcus stood alone in our conference room, surrounded by evidence of his deceptions. Evelyn, please, I can explain everything, no need, I said. Your message was quite clear. You found someone more suitable, remember? Although I'm not sure she thinks so anymore. Marcus paced the room, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. You had no right to do this, he sputtered, his sales persona crumbling. You went through my business records, had someone investigate me, just like you had no right to use my facility's reputation to sell overpriced equipment? I kept my voice steady. Or use our vendor relationship to secure fraudulent contracts? He grabbed one of the folders, rifling through documents. This could ruin me, he said, his voice rising. Richard is going to terminate our contracts. St. Mary's will blacklist me. How could you be so vindictive? Vindictive? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You ended our 3-year relationship with a message, Marcus. You were planning to leave me with thousands in fraudulent equipment contracts while you started fresh in Chicago with a new hospital network. And I'm vindictive? His expression shifted, trying to find that persuasive smile that had once convinced so many hospital administrators. Look, I know I handled things badly, but we can fix this. I'll break it off with Sophia, we can work something out with Richard. Just help me clean up this compliance issue. The same way you helped me review equipment contracts while secretly arranging deals with other facilities? I pulled out my tablet, showing him screenshots of his supplier negotiations. Or the way you helped me plan our wedding right after signing exclusive contracts with Sophia's hospital? That's different, he protested weakly. I was confused. I made mistakes, no, I said firmly. A mistake is forgetting to file a compliance report or misquoting a price. You orchestrated an entire fraudulent operation. You lied to everyone, me, Sophia, your company, even the medical board. Your certifications aren't even valid. The mention of certifications made him flinch. That's when I delivered the final blow. They know, by the way. I sent copies of everything to the state medical board yesterday. Your mother called me this morning crying. She's devastated, not just about Sophia, but about the kickbacks, the fraudulent certifications, all of it. Marcus sank into a conference chair, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face ashen. For the first time, I saw him clearly not as the successful medical equipment supplier I'd fallen in love with, but as someone who'd built his entire career on fraud and deception. What do you want? He asked quietly. Money? A public apology? Name it. I walked to the door and opened it. I want you to leave. Take your documents, you'll need them for the meetings I'm sure are coming up. The medical board, your company's compliance department, St. Mary's legal team, the equipment certification board, they'll all want to talk to you. After Marcus left, things moved quickly. Within a week, he'd lost his position apparently, Richard had been looking for a reason to investigate his contracts, and my evidence provided several. Sophia's hospital launched an ethics investigation, forcing her resignation, and those Chicago healthcare networks weren't too happy when they learned about his fraudulent certifications. I threw myself into managing our facility, grateful for understanding staff and endless care plans that needed my attention. But late at night, when my office felt too quiet, doubts would creep in. Had I gone too far? Was I just as bad as him, plotting revenge instead of walking away? Then I'd remember his message, 3 cold sentences dismissing our entire relationship. The countless lies, the money he'd made from inflated contracts while telling me we needed to be careful with our facility's budget for patient care. The way he'd used our relationship to build his fraudulent empire. A month after the confrontation, I met Thomas for coffee to close out his investigation. "I thought you'd want to know," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "Marcus has moved back in with his parents in New Hampshire. His father is trying to help him handle the certification board investigation, but it's worse than we initially thought. The equipment fraud wasn't just occasional, he has some serious violations out there." I nodded, not sure how to feel about this information. "And Sophia took a position in California. From what I can tell, she wants nothing to do with him anymore." Thomas paused. "You know, in my line of work, I see a lot of people seeking revenge. Most of them go about it all wrong. They let emotion drive them to do things that only hurt themselves in the end. But you simply exposed the truth. Everything that's happened to him is a direct result of his own actions in our healthcare system." "Sometimes the truth is the best revenge," I said, thinking about how easily Marcus's lies had flowed, how casually he'd endangered patient care with his fraud. "I just made sure everyone saw it at once." Thomas smiled. "Well, your retainer still has some money left. Want me to keep monitoring the medical board investigation?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No, I'm done. He can handle his own regulatory issues now." As I walked back to our facility, my phone buzzed with a text from Diana, "Lunch tomorrow?" The new cafe near the medical center opened. My treat. I smiled, remembering how she'd stood by me through everything. That's when it hit me, the weight I'd been carrying, the constant tension in my shoulders when reviewing contracts was gone. Marcus's betrayal had broken my heart, yes, but it hadn't broken my spirit or my commitment to ethical healthcare. The truth was my weapon, and I'd wielded it perfectly. Marcus had thought he could simply press send on a message and walk away unscathed from both our relationship and his professional responsibilities. Instead, his carefully constructed house of fraudulent contracts had collapsed, leaving him to face the consequences of every certification he'd falsified. The next few months brought changes I never expected. Without Marcus's questionable contracts draining our resources, our facility's finances improved significantly. I started implementing new care programs, working with legitimate suppliers who appreciated our commitment to patient care. My reputation in the healthcare community grew stronger. Administrators who valued integrity over kickbacks sought out our facility's partnership. One morning, while reviewing patient satisfaction reports at my usual coffee spot, I ran into Richard, Marcus's former boss. He'd been instrumental in the aftermath of my revelations, though we'd never discussed it directly. "Evelyn," he said warmly, "how are you holding up?" I stirred my coffee, considering the question. "Actually, I'm doing really well. Better than I expected." He nodded, then hesitated. "Listen, I should have told you this sooner. We'd been investigating Marcus's certification records for months before everything came out. There were irregularities we couldn't ignore, but we had no idea about the personal side of things. You, Sophia, the extent of the fraud. You did us a favor bringing it all to light at once." I just needed the truth to come out, I replied. Everything else was just consequences of his actions. Well, speaking of consequences, Richard continued, we're restructuring our entire medical supply division, all 40,000 square feet of inventory and offices. Would you be interested in consulting on the project? Your facility's reputation for ethical management is excellent, and after everything, well, let's just say I trust your attention to detail. That consultation became my biggest project yet, a complete healthcare supply chain overhaul that would establish new standards in our industry. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus's downfall had led to my biggest professional breakthrough. My parents, who'd been heartbroken about the canceled wedding, now proudly told friends about their daughter, the healthcare compliance consultant. Mom even confessed that she'd never fully trusted Marcus. Something about his equipment pricing had always seemed off to her, she said, like he was trying too hard to make the sale. Diana convinced me to start accepting other consulting projects, though I was hesitant. Not everyone is hiding a fraudulent certification scheme, she insisted. And now you know all the red flags to watch for. She was right about the red flags. I found myself noticing things I might have overlooked before: inconsistencies in supply chain documentation, subtle manipulations in contract negotiations, the way some vendors talked about their certification processes. Each observation felt like a small victory, proof that I'd learned from my experience rather than being broken by it. The last ties to Marcus unraveled slowly. His mother called one final time, apologizing again for her son's fraudulent behavior and returning some facility documents I'd left at their house. I donated all the wedding items we'd collected, no point in keeping reminders of a bullet dodged. The venue deposit, the carefully chosen vendor contracts, all of it went away, making room for new possibilities. Sometimes, usually late at night while reviewing facility reports, I'd think about Sophia. Had she been as fooled as I was by his professional demeanor? Did she lie awake wondering which parts of their hospital contracts had been legitimate? I hoped she'd found her way to a better position too, free from his web of healthcare fraud. The money from the canceled equipment orders, my inadvertent emergency fund, turned out to be seed money for expanding our facility's ethical supply chain program. I hired 2 compliance specialists and moved into a proper administrative suite. Every time I signed a legitimate vendor contract or approved a properly certified equipment purchase, I thought about Marcus's dismissive message. He thought he was ending our story, but really, he just freed me to write a better one. Almost a year after Marcus's message, I received an unexpected email from Sophia. She was back in Boston briefly and wanted to meet. I agreed, more out of professional curiosity than anything else, and we arranged to meet at a quiet cafe away from the medical district. She looked different from that day in my office, more grounded, her designer suit replaced with practical business attire. She'd cut her long hair into an efficient bob and traded her luxury accessories for a simple leather briefcase. We ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence until she finally spoke. "I've been wanting to thank you," she said, turning her cup slowly. "Not just for exposing Marcus, but for doing it the way you did all at once, with all the evidence present. It was humiliating at the time, but it was like removing a bandage, painful but quick." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "How are you doing now?" "Better. Much better." The position in California was a fresh start. I'm managing compliance for a major hospital network now. No more questionable supplier relationships. She paused. "I'm seeing someone new, an architect who specializes in healthcare facilities. He's genuine. No hidden certifications, no secret contracts, just an honest professional who actually cares about his work." She paused. "I heard through mutual connections that Marcus tried to contact you?" "He did," I confirmed, remembering the desperate voicemails and emails that had started arriving about 6 months after the confrontation. I never responded. Me neither, Sophia said. Though he tried hard enough, sent proposals to my new office in San Francisco, called my parents, even tried to reach me through LinkedIn. She shook her head. It's like he still doesn't get it. He's not sorry for what he did, he's just sorry he got caught. We talked for almost 2 hours, filling in the gaps in each other's stories. Her version of Marcus had been completely different from mine. He'd played the role of a successful single medical supplier, telling her his long hours were due to managing his own certification portfolio. He'd even hinted at marriage, all while planning a wedding with me. You know what the strangest part is? Sophia said as we prepared to leave. In all the time we worked together, he never once let me see his actual supplier documentation. Always had an excuse pending audits, certification reviews, compliance checks. She laughed quietly. Now I know why. He told me our facility's equipment certification process was taking 6 months straight, I added with a wry smile. I guess juggling fraudulent paperwork gets complicated. Before we parted, Sophia handed me an envelope. These were in my files. I thought you might want to decide what to do with them. Inside were photos of Marcus with me at various healthcare conferences. I'd appeared in the background of pictures meant to document his networking with Sophia. I dropped the envelope in the first recycling bin I passed. Those memories, like Marcus himself, no longer had any power over me. That evening, I had dinner with Diana and told her about meeting Sophia. You both dodged a major compliance violation, she said, raising her glass. Here's to spotting fraudulent certifications and coming out stronger. I clinked my glass against hers, thinking about how far I'd come. Here's to knowing your own worth, I added, and never settling for questionable credentials. Looking back now, I can hardly recognize the facility director who received that cold message from Marcus. She was someone who thought ethical compromises were part of business, who measured her worth through someone else's validation. The journey from that morning to where I am now wasn't easy, but it transformed me in ways I never expected. My healthcare facility has flourished beyond my wildest expectations. The compliance consulting project for Richard's company led to partnerships with other medical suppliers, and I've had to hire 3 more specialists to keep up with the demand for ethical supply chain management. Last month, a prestigious healthcare journal featured our work on their cover, a comprehensive case study on implementing transparent certification processes that perfectly captured my philosophy of combining integrity with efficiency. The money I saved from canceling Marcus's fraudulent equipment orders turned out to be the best investment I ever made, not just financially, but ethically. It taught me to trust my instincts about certification documentation, to act decisively when compliance issues arise. That lesson has served me well in both business and life. Diana jokes that I should thank Marcus for setting me free, but I don't give him that much credit. My success came from choosing integrity over convenient lies, from refusing to let his fraud define my facility's future. Instead of drowning in bitterness about falsified documents, I channeled that energy into building something meaningful. Sometimes new clients ask about the sealed certifications on my office wall, the ones that replaced Marcus's fraudulent equipment contracts. I used to feel embarrassed, but now I tell them the truth. They're reminders of when I chose legitimate business practices over comfortable deception, ethical standards over easy profits, and self-respect over settling. Last week, I was meeting a new supplier at the same medical center where Marcus first proposed our partnership. As I waited for them to arrive, I caught my reflection in the window, confident, successful, at peace. The receptionist recognized me and mentioned that Marcus had been in recently, looking worse for wear, trying to impress potential clients with stories about pending certification appeals. Some things never change, but I have. The facility director who once desperately tried to understand his fraudulent documentation now runs a thriving consulting practice built on transparency and trust. The engagement contract money that was meant to bind me to his schemes instead set me free. The scorching African sun was merciless as I stepped outside the makeshift medical tent, wiping sweat from my brow. I had just finished a 6-hour emergency surgery on a young patient, and my body ached for rest. The familiar buzz of my phone cut through the ambient sounds of the busy medical camp, the chatter of local nurses, the whir of generators, and the distant calls of village life. The name on the screen made my heart sink. Marcus Blackwood. After years of dealing with my stepfather's manipulative games, I knew calls from him rarely brought anything but trouble. Still, a small part of me, perhaps the optimistic doctor in me that believed in healing, hoped this time might be different. Hello? I kept my voice professionally neutral, the same tone I used with difficult patients. Evelyn. His voice dripped with artificial cheer that made my skin crawl. Just thought you'd want to know, I've sold the mountain cabin. I froze, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles turned white. The sounds of the medical camp seemed to fade away, replaced by a hollow ringing in my ears. You did what? Sold it. He repeated with disturbing enthusiasm, as if announcing a celebration. Don't look so shocked, it's for the greater good of mine, obviously. His smug laugh echoed through the line, a sound that made my blood pressure spike in a way that would concern me as a doctor. My name is Dr. Evelyn Parker, and for as long as I can remember, Marcus Blackwood has been the cancer in my family's life. He married my mother when I was 15, worming his way into our lives with charm and calculated humor. But beneath that polished exterior was a man who treated others' possessions like chess pieces in his endless games of self-interest. The cabin wasn't just a vacation property, it was my sanctuary, a piece of my mother's legacy that I'd preserved through medical school and countless volunteer missions. It was where I recharged between grueling deployments with Doctors Without Borders, where I hosted fellow physicians for strategy sessions, and where I felt closest to my mother's memory. Hearing Marcus treat it like a poker chip made my carefully maintained professional composure crack. You had no right, I said, my voice trembling with the same intensity one reserved for confronting negligent parents. That cabin wasn't yours to sell. Relax, dear, Marcus drawled, his voice carrying that condescending tone he always used when he thought he was being clever. I've been managing things while you're off playing hero in Africa. And really, what's the point of a cabin you're never around to enjoy? It was an elegant solution to my temporary financial concerns. You'll thank me later. I'll thank you when hell freezes over, I snapped, ending the call before my medical ethics about doing no harm could be severely tested. I paced the narrow space between medical supply crates, my scrubs still bearing traces of the day's surgeries. The familiar scent of antiseptic did nothing to calm my racing thoughts. Marcus's audacity had reached new heights, but this time he'd made a critical error in judgment. What he didn't know, what I'd carefully kept from him, was that the cabin wasn't solely mine to sell. My best friend and fellow advocate for justice, Amelia Hayes, was co-owner. The environmental lawyer in her had insisted on a legally binding co-ownership agreement years ago, requiring both our signatures for any sale. I sank onto a metal folding chair, staring at my phone as if it might explode with another call from Marcus. My mind raced back to all the times he'd manipulated situations, each memory burning like antiseptic on an open wound. How could he think this was acceptable? Selling something so deeply personal to me as if it were just another asset in his portfolio of schemes. The cabin wasn't just property, it was my lifeline. It was where I spent summers with my mother before she married Marcus, where she taught me about the healing properties of local plants, sparking my interest in medicine. After her unexpected death, it became my anchor, the one place where I could still feel her presence guiding my path in medicine. Marcus, predictably, saw none of this. To him, it was just another asset to leverage, like everything else he'd exploited over the years. But this wasn't some minor transgression, this was my heritage, my haven between saving lives. With hands that had performed delicate surgeries just hours before, I tapped Amelia's contact information and waited for her to answer. "Hey Evelyn, caught you between surgeries?" Amelia's voice came through clear despite the distance, carrying the sharp focus she was known for in environmental law circles. "Marcus sold the cabin," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The medical tent's canvas walls suddenly felt suffocating. There was a pointed silence on her end, then, "He what?" Her tone carried the same intensity I'd heard her use in environmental protection cases. "Apparently, he needed to cover his gambling debts," I explained, my free hand instinctively organizing medical supplies, a habit that helped me think clearly. "He seems to think he has the authority to make unilateral decisions about the property. But our co-ownership agreement makes that legally impossible. He can't sell without your consent." Amelia let out a controlled breath, the same one she used before delivering closing arguments. That man's arrogance is truly breathtaking. Did he really think he could pull this off? "He has no idea about the legal safeguards we put in place," I said, finding some comfort in our preparation. "I'll wrap up this medical mission and head back as soon as I can. Could you pull up our documentation? I want to be ready to counter this the moment I land." "Already on it," Amelia replied with the efficiency that made her a formidable environmental advocate. "I'll have everything prepared. We're not letting him get away with this, Evelyn. Not this time." As I ended the call, a peculiar calm settled over me, the same focused state I entered before complex surgeries. Marcus thought he'd outsmarted me, assuming I was too occupied saving lives in Africa to challenge his betrayal. But he'd severely underestimated both me and my resources. I wasn't the intimidated medical student he used to manipulate. I was a skilled physician with a strong support system and an intimate understanding of how to fight for what's right. The next few days passed in a blur of medical procedures and patient consultations. Even as I treated malaria cases and conducted pediatric examinations, Marcus's betrayal lingered in my thoughts like a persistent infection. During brief breaks between patients, I found myself documenting everything in my medical journal, not patient notes this time, but memories of the cabin, the first time my mother showed me how to identify medicinal plants in the garden, the countless hours Amelia and I spent restoring the place, the peaceful evenings by the fireplace planning future medical missions. This wasn't just a building Marcus could gamble away, it was a crucial part of my identity as both a daughter and a doctor. Amelia's call came as I was updating patient charts in the quiet of the evening. "I've reviewed our co-ownership agreement," she said, her voice carrying the confident tone she used when preparing for environmental protection cases. "As we thought, any sale without my explicit consent is legally void. He's got absolutely no standing." Relief washed over me like the feeling after a successful surgery. "Have you found out who he tried to sell it to?" "Not yet," Amelia replied, keyboard clicks punctuating her words. "I've accessed the county records, but there's no official transfer of ownership recorded. Classic Marcus trying to operate in the shadows." "Sounds exactly like him," I said, organizing my medical supplies with practiced precision. "Always looking for shortcuts, always trying to manipulate the system." "What's our next move?" I asked, unconsciously using the same tone I used when consulting with other doctors on complex cases. "We have two options," Amelia responded, her legal mind already mapping out strategies. "We can either confront him directly, or we can let the legal system do the heavy lifting. Either way, the law is firmly on our side. He has no legal foundation for this sale. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, feeling the tension ease from my shoulders. Thanks, Amelia. I don't know where I'd be without you. You'd still be fighting the good fight, she said warmly, but it's better to have backup. We're in this together, just like we've always been. As I hung up, a strategy began forming in my mind, as clear as a surgical plan. I'd complete my remaining medical duties here, return home, and face Marcus head-on. But I wouldn't match his emotional manipulation with anger. That's what he'd expect from the stepdaughter he still saw as an impulsive teenager. Instead, I'd approach this like a difficult medical case, with calm precision, careful planning, and the backing of expertise. He thought he'd won, but he was about to learn that years of handling medical crises had taught me more than just how to save lives. When I finally walked into my apartment, the silence hit me differently than the bustling sounds of the medical camp I'd grown accustomed to. My potted medicinal herbs, carefully selected to remind me of the cabin's garden, had wilted slightly, and a stack of medical journals waited by the door. I had barely set down my medical bag when my phone buzzed. Marcus. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but my medical training had taught me that sometimes you have to face infections head-on. Well, if it isn't my globe-trotting stepdaughter, Marcus's voice oozed artificial warmth. Finally back from saving the world? What do you want, Marcus? I kept my tone clinical, the same one I used when delivering difficult diagnoses. Just checking in, he said, his smugness practically radiating through the phone. Making sure you're not too broken up about the cabin situation. Water under the bridge now, isn't it? Interesting you should say that, I replied, maintaining the calm demeanor I'd perfected in emergency rooms. Because according to the property records, the cabin isn't under the bridge at all. Amelia and I checked the ownership records. Your attempted sale never went through. There was a pause, the kind I'd heard countless times when delivering unexpected test results. Then, that's ridiculous, Marcus said, his voice tightening like a tourniquet. The buyer paid cash. The paperwork is done. It's finished. No, it's not, I stated, as firmly as I would when insisting on a necessary medical procedure. Amelia and I are co-owners. Remember? Without her consent, any sale is legally void. The cabin remains ours. His laugh came out brittle, like a failing vital sign monitor. You think you're so clever, don't you? Always the perfect doctor, always trying to control everything. You have no idea what I've been dealing with, Evelyn. I did what I had to do. You tried to steal from me, I countered, years of medical ethics strengthening my resolve. And you expect me to sympathize? You've made your choices, Marcus, and now you'll have to face the consequences. The line went dead as he hung up, leaving me standing in my apartment, phone in hand, feeling the same rush of adrenaline I got during successful resuscitations. For years, I'd allowed Marcus to manipulate situations, guilt-trip me, and take advantage of my demanding schedule. But not anymore. This wasn't just about protecting the cabin, it was about establishing healthy boundaries, something I routinely advocated for my patients but had struggled to implement in my own life. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open like a surgical tray laid out with instruments. The co-ownership agreement Amelia had sent over was as clear as a clean X-ray. Neither of us could sell the cabin without the other's written consent. Marcus's actions weren't just unethical, they were as blatantly wrong as a misdiagnosis. My focus was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door, carrying the same urgency as an emergency room alert. There stood Marcus, wearing his trademark self-assured expression, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost as much as a month's worth of medical supplies. Mind if I come in? He didn't wait for an answer, striding into my apartment like he was entering his own private clinic. I crossed my arms, watching him settle into my chair with the same clinical detachment I used when observing difficult patients. "What do you want, Marcus?" "Look, Evelyn," he began, his tone dripping with the kind of condescension I often heard from pharmaceutical representatives. "I know you're upset, but you have to understand my position. I was in a tight spot. The people I owed money to weren't exactly the patient type." I raised an eyebrow, the same way I did when catching an inconsistency in a patient's story. "And you thought selling property that wasn't yours was the solution?" "Borrowing," he corrected, as if changing the diagnosis would alter the symptoms. "I was going to make it back. Once my luck turned around, I would have made everything right." I couldn't help but let out a laugh as bitter as strong antiseptic. "Your luck? That's what you're counting on, Marcus? You've been gambling away money since before my mother's death, and it's never worked out. What made you think this time would be different?" He shifted in his seat like an uncomfortable patient, but his facade quickly returned. "You're overreacting. It's just a cabin. You're hardly ever there with all your medical missions. Why not let someone else make use of it?" "Because it's mine," I said with the same conviction I used when insisting on life-saving procedures. "Because it's my sanctuary. You don't get to decide what I value or what I do with my property. And for the record, Amelia values it just as much as I do. Your attempted sale is as invalid as an unsigned prescription." His face darkened like a threatening prognosis, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of fear, the kind I often witnessed in patients receiving serious diagnoses. "You wouldn't really go to the authorities, would you? You wouldn't destroy your own stepfather like that?" I leaned forward, meeting his gaze with the same steady focus I maintained during delicate procedures. "Try me." For once, Marcus had no clever response. He stood up, mumbling something under his breath, and stormed out, slamming the door with enough force to rattle my framed medical license. I sank back into my chair, my heart racing like it did after a challenging surgery. The confrontation had left me shaken, but I also felt a surge of professional satisfaction. Marcus was finally beginning to realize that his usual manipulative techniques wouldn't work on me anymore. This wasn't just about the cabin, it was about standing up to someone who had been undermining my boundaries since medical school. He showed up at my apartment, I told Amelia during our video call, pacing my living room like I did during difficult consultations. Tried to spin some story about how he borrowed the cabin to settle his gambling debts. Amelia's laugh through the screen was as sharp as a surgical blade. "Borrowed? That's rich. Does he even hear himself? What did you say?" I told him the sale was invalid, and if he pushed me, I'd go to the authorities, I replied, automatically organizing my medical journals as I spoke, a habit that helped me process stressful situations. That seemed to shake him, but knowing Marcus, he's probably already plotting his next move. "Let him plot," Amelia said with the confidence of a winning legal argument. "I've contacted our lawyer to draft a formal cease and desist letter. If he tries to involve the buyer again, we'll have a legal paper trail ready to stop him." I nodded, her words grounding me like a steady pulse during surgery. "Thanks, Amelia. I don't know what I'd do without your expertise in all this." "You'd find another way," she said, "but we're stronger together, just like in our environmental protection cases." Over the next few days, I approached gathering evidence with the same methodical precision I used in documenting patient cases. Each piece of documentation was carefully organized: the co-ownership agreement, screenshots of Marcus's incriminating messages, and communications with the real estate agent. When I contacted the agent, her voice carried the nervous energy of someone confessing medical history they'd previously withheld. Dr. Parker, I need to be clear about this, she said hastily. I had no idea about the co-ownership situation. Marcus assured me he had full authority to sell. I maintained my professional composure, the same tone I used when gathering sensitive patient information. I understand. I'm not trying to implicate you in this. I just need to confirm, did Marcus sign the paperwork alone? Yes, she admitted, relief evident in her voice. The buyer hasn't completed payment because I flagged some irregularities in the transaction. I can provide you with all the relevant documentation. That would be very helpful, I replied, making mental notes as precisely as I would during rounds. As I ended the call, I felt the same focused determination that guided me through complex medical procedures. Marcus had counted on me being too preoccupied with my medical work to fight back, but he was about to learn just how thorough a doctor could be. Amelia's evening call brought more positive developments. The cease and desist letter is ready, she announced with the satisfaction of a successful environmental injunction. We'll send it first thing tomorrow. If he makes any more attempts to claim ownership, we'll escalate immediately. Perfect, I said, allowing myself a small smile, the kind I reserved for successful treatment outcomes. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like I was regaining control of the situation. Marcus thought he could steamroll over my rights, but he was about to face a different kind of diagnosis, one he couldn't charm his way out of. Detective Miller's call came just as I was reviewing patient files. His voice carried the professional authority I recognized from my own field. Dr. Parker, I've reviewed the documents you and Ms. Hayes provided. The unauthorized sale attempt is clear-cut. We can proceed with a formal investigation if you wish. Yes, I replied without hesitation, the same decisiveness I used in emergency situations. I want to pursue this. We'll begin by contacting the potential buyer, Detective Miller explained, his methodical approach reminding me of consulting with fellow physicians. Based on the evidence, if Marcus continues to interfere, we'll pursue criminal charges for fraudulent misrepresentation. Thank you, Detective, I responded, unconsciously organizing my medical documents as we spoke. The systematic approach to justice felt familiar, like following a well-planned treatment protocol. Marcus's call came during my clinic hours, his voice carrying a desperate edge I'd heard in patients facing serious diagnoses. Do you have any idea what you've done, Evelyn? He demanded. You're destroying everything. No, Marcus, I replied with the calm certainty I used when explaining necessary medical procedures. I'm protecting what's mine. You created this situation yourself. You've always been so ungrateful, he sneered. I stepped in when your mother was overwhelmed, and this is how you repay me? I felt a laugh rise in my throat, as bitter as surgical antiseptic. You didn't step in, Marcus. You invaded. You manipulated and used people for your own gain, just like you're doing now. The difference is, this time there are consequences. He started to protest, but I cut him off with the same decisiveness I used in emergency situations. This conversation is over. If you have anything else to say, direct it to my lawyer. I ended the call and sat back in my office chair, my heart racing like it did after a difficult procedure. Marcus's days of manipulating me were finally coming to an end. Detective Miller's update came while I was between patient consultations. Dr. Parker, we've spoken with the buyer, he reported. They were unaware of the co-ownership agreement and have agreed to withdraw from the transaction. They're fully cooperating with our investigation. Relief washed over me like the feeling after a successful surgery. So the sale is officially void? Yes, he confirmed. The cabin remains under your and Ms. Hayes' ownership. However, we'll need to keep the case open to address your stepfather's fraudulent actions. Would you like to press charges? I paused, my mind working through the options like diagnosing a complex case. Yes, I said firmly, using the same conviction I had when recommending crucial treatments. I want him held accountable. Understood, Detective Miller replied. We'll proceed with the case. Thank you for your cooperation. After ending the call, I took a deep breath, feeling the same mix of emotions I experienced after a challenging medical intervention. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. The cabin was secure, and Marcus's schemes were finally facing proper scrutiny. The sale is officially void, I told Amelia during our video call, unconsciously straightening my medical journals as I spoke. The buyer's withdrawing completely. That's excellent news, Amelia responded, her satisfaction evident. What about Marcus? The police are moving forward with their investigation, I explained, my voice carrying the same professional tone I used when discussing treatment plans. He's not getting away with this anymore. Good, she said firmly. It's about time someone held him accountable. How are you feeling about all this? Her words resonated with me, like a precise diagnosis finally clicking into place. For years, I'd allowed Marcus to operate unchecked, his manipulations, his entitlement, his complete disregard for boundaries. But this time, I'd stood my ground, using the same determination that had carried me through medical school and countless humanitarian missions. That evening, I visited the cabin for the first time since returning from Africa. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of pine and cedar wrapped around me like a protective blanket. The sound of my footsteps on the wooden floors, the gentle creak of the door, everything reminded me of why this place meant so much. I settled into my favorite chair by the fireplace, letting the quiet of the mountains wash over me. This wasn't just a property I was defending, it was my sanctuary, where I processed difficult cases, celebrated medical breakthroughs, and found peace amid the chaos of emergency medicine. And it was still mine, despite Marcus's best efforts. Detective Miller's final update came between my morning rounds. Dr. Parker, I wanted to inform you that your stepfather has been formally charged with fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted theft of property. Given the evidence we've collected, including the documentation you and Ms. Hayes provided, the case against him is substantial. I absorbed this news with the same controlled composure I maintained during critical procedures. Thank you for everything, Detective, I said, my voice steady and professional. You handled this situation remarkably well, he noted. It's not easy to stand up to family, but you did the right thing. After ending the call, I sat in my office, surrounded by medical texts and patient files, processing the weight of everything that had transpired. Marcus had been such a dominant force in my life for years, his toxic influence as persistent as a chronic condition, and now I was finally free from his manipulations. The next day, Amelia and I met at the cabin. She arrived with a bottle of wine and the same triumphant energy she carried after winning major environmental cases. We settled on the porch, the mountain air carrying the familiar scent of pine that had always helped me decompress after difficult surgeries. To standing our ground, she said, raising her glass. And to not letting anyone push us around anymore. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling a smile spread across my face, the kind I usually reserved for delivering good news to patients. To us. As we talked, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd learned from this ordeal. Like diagnosing a complex medical condition, I'd needed to trust my instincts, gather evidence, and take decisive action. I'd spent so much of my career helping others stand up for their health and well-being, but this time I'd done it for myself. You know, Amelia said, interrupting my thoughts, this cabin has always been more than just property. It's a symbol of everything we've worked for, everything we believe in. Never let anyone take that away from you again. Her words resonated with the same clarity as a perfect diagnosis. The cabin wasn't just a retreat in the mountains, it was a testament to my independence, my resilience, and my determination to protect what mattered most. As I sat by the fireplace, watching the flames dance in the same hypnotic way that helped me process difficult cases, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Marcus's betrayal had tested my professional composure in ways no medical emergency ever had, but it had also shown me just how much strength I'd developed through years of handling critical situations. Life gradually settled into a new rhythm, like a patient recovering after successful treatment. The cabin, once the center of Marcus's attempted theft, became my sanctuary again. Each creak of the floorboards and whisper of wind through the trees reminded me of what I'd fought to protect. During this time, my mother called once. Her voice carried the hesitation I often heard in patients' family members struggling to accept a diagnosis. "You know how he gets, Evelyn," she said, her usual defense of Marcus sounding hollow. "I do," I replied with the same professional certainty I used when explaining treatment plans. "That's exactly why I did what I had to do." She didn't argue. For the first time, there was no attempt to mediate, no plea for understanding. Just a quiet acknowledgement before she said, "I hope you find peace." "I already have," I responded, and I meant it. Amelia and I spent the following weekends making improvements to the cabin. We repaired loose shingles, reinforced the porch railings, and planted new herbs in the garden, each one carefully selected for its medicinal properties. Every improvement felt like strengthening our claim to this place, much like building immunity against future threats. One evening, as we finished painting the porch, Amelia turned to me. "So, what's next for you, Evelyn? You've secured the cabin, stood up to Marcus, what's the next challenge?" I considered her question with the same thoughtfulness I gave to complex medical cases. "I'm going to continue doing what I love," I said, my voice carrying the confidence I'd earned through years of medical practice. Treating patients, volunteering with Doctors Without Borders, living life on my terms. But this time, I'm not letting anyone else dictate how I do it. She smiled, understanding the diagnosis behind my words. To that. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting more on everything I'd learned from this experience. It wasn't just about the cabin or even Marcus, it was about recognizing my own strength, the same way I helped patients recognize their resilience during recovery. For years, I'd let his behavior influence how much I pushed back, how much I tolerated, but now I knew I was capable of setting and maintaining boundaries, no matter how uncomfortable it made others feel. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting the same golden light that had witnessed countless moments of healing in this place, I stood on the porch, breathing in the crisp, pine-scented air. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home, not just in the cabin, but in my own life. The peace I found here wasn't just about the location anymore, it was about knowing I had the strength to protect what mattered, the same strength that had carried me through countless medical emergencies and humanitarian missions. As I watched the last rays of sunlight paint the sky, I knew that this wasn't just an ending to Marcus's chapter in my life, it was the beginning of my own story, written on my own terms. "You're late," Patricia said as she stepped out onto the driveway, pulling her designer suitcase behind her. I glanced at my watch, 9:02 a.m., barely 2 minutes past our agreed meeting time. The morning sun was already beating down on the freshly washed Mercedes I'd driven over in. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing a smile while climbing out of the driver's seat. Traffic was heavier than expected. But as I moved to help with the luggage, I froze. There was Mackenzie, my stepsister, emerging from the house with her own suitcase and a matching carry-on. My heart dropped to my stomach. "What's going on?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. My stepmother, Patricia, turned to me with that overly bright smile she always wore when she was about to say something particularly cruel. "Oh, Audrey, dear," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "we decided Mackenzie should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately with her job hunting, and she really needs this break." She said it like she was announcing a slight change in dinner plans, not completely derailing the European vacation I'd spent 2 years planning. My chest tightened as the reality of the situation hit me. "Instead of me?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Mom, I've been planning this for years. I put everything into this, the hotels, the private tours, all of it. Working overtime at the medical equipment company, saving every commission check, spending countless nights researching the perfect itinerary." Patricia waved her hand dismissively, her gold bracelets catching the morning light. "We're grateful, sweetheart, but you're always so busy with work. You can take another trip later. Mackenzie needs this right now." Mackenzie didn't even attempt to hide her smirk as she adjusted her designer sunglasses, shifting her weight onto one hip. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, her tone dripping with the same artificial sweetness as her mother's. The same tone she'd used when she'd borrowed my prom dress in high school and returned it with wine stains. I stared at them both, my hands gripping my car keys so tight the metal dug into my palm. Harrison, my father, shuffled out a moment later, his eyes fixed on the ground as he wheeled his luggage toward me. The sight of him avoiding my gaze only intensified the burning in my chest. "This is unbelievable," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. After 15 years of trying to be the perfect stepdaughter, of accepting Patricia and Mackenzie into our family after my mother's death, this was how they repaid my effort. "This was supposed to be our trip, Dad. Something I planned for us, as a family." "Well, it still is family," Patricia interjected with that infuriating smile, "just with Mackenzie instead. Don't make this a big deal, Audrey. Your sister really needs a break from all that job searching." My name is Audrey, and for the past 2 years, I've been working overtime in medical equipment sales, saving every commission check, every bonus, to give my family a trip they'd never forget. Luxury hotels in Paris, private tours in Rome, exclusive dinner reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants. I'd planned every detail with painstaking care. But as I stood there in the crowded drop-off zone at O'Hare International, watching Mackenzie swagger toward the terminal entrance with her designer luggage, I realized something I'd been avoiding since my father's remarriage. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much I sacrificed. In their eyes, particularly Patricia's, Mackenzie would always come first. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the bitter words threatening to spill out. Instead, I forced a tight smile and popped the trunk. "Let's get going then," I said, my voice as flat as the Illinois prairie. If they wanted to prioritize her over me, fine. They could go with her, but I wasn't about to let them enjoy the luxury vacation I'd planned and paid for. The drive through Chicago's morning traffic was suffocating, broken only by Mackenzie's incessant chatter from the back seat. "Oh my God, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? The one with that cute cafe near the Eiffel Tower? We have to go there. Do you think we'll have time, or will those fancy tours Audrey booked take up the whole day?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my eyes fixed on the stream of cars ahead. The medical sales reports I needed to review later sat untouched in my briefcase, a reminder of the real world I'd have to return to after this nightmare of a morning. Patricia chuckled softly from the passenger seat. "Of course we'll have time, sweetie. We'll figure it out when we get there." She patted her designer handbag, probably already planning which boutiques to visit. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste metal. "When we get there." The words echoed in my head. They didn't even seem to notice that I wasn't part of that we anymore. Harrison cleared his throat from the back seat, his voice hesitant. Thank you for driving us, Audrey. I know this probably feels unusual. He caught my eye in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the father who'd raised me alone after my mother died, the one who'd attended every school event and celebrated every small victory in my career. Unusual? I let out a hollow laugh. That's an interesting way to put it, Dad. The word betrayal hung unspoken in the air. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, probably wishing he hadn't spoken at all, just like he'd done at every family dinner when Patricia criticized my choice of career or Mackenzie made snide comments about my work hours. Mackenzie leaned forward between the front seats, her expensive perfume filling the car. You're not mad, right? Her voice grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. I mean, this is really big of you, letting me go. I could never have afforded this on my own, what with the job market being so tough right now. As if she'd been doing anything more than half-heartedly scrolling through job listings between Instagram posts. I clenched my jaw and forced what felt like my 100th fake smile of the morning. Of course, Mackenzie. Enjoy the trip. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. By the time we pulled up to O'Hare's International Terminal, my patience was hanging by a thread. The morning sun glinted off the glass and steel structure, a building that should have marked the start of my dream vacation. Instead, I found myself mechanically unloading their luggage, each bag a reminder of the trip I wouldn't be taking. Patricia wrapped me in a perfumed hug, her jewelry cold against my skin. Thank you for understanding, sweetheart. This means a lot to us, and to Mackenzie. Her words felt like tiny daggers, each one precisely aimed. I nodded stiffly, my body rigid. Sure, Mom. The word Mom felt foreign on my tongue, as it had since she'd married my father 10 years ago. Mackenzie beamed as she wheeled her suitcase toward the entrance, her designer sunglasses perched perfectly on her nose. Thanks, Audrey, you're the best. Her voice carried across the busy drop-off area, drawing curious glances from other travelers. If they only knew the reality behind her cheerful farewell. The drive back to my house in the Chicago suburbs was a blur of highway signs and morning traffic. I replayed the morning's conversation in my head on loop, each word cutting deeper than the last. This means a lot to Mackenzie. You're not mad, right? You're always so busy with work. I pulled into my driveway, the same one I'd left just hours earlier, filled with excitement about the trip. Now I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the medical sales reports in my briefcase suddenly seeming meaningless. Without a second thought, I marched into my home office, pulled out my laptop, and logged into every travel account I'd used to book the trip. The familiar glow of the screen illuminated my face as I systematically dismantled 2 years of planning. 5-star hotel reservations in Paris, cancelled. Private tours of the Vatican, refunded. Michelin-starred restaurant bookings, deleted. First-class airline upgrades, reversed. I stared at the confirmation emails piling up in my inbox, feeling the tightness in my chest start to ease with each cancellation notification. They wanted to take Mackenzie instead of me? Fine, but they wouldn't be staying in luxury hotels or enjoying private tours on my dime. As I closed my laptop, a sense of satisfaction settled over me. Let them explain themselves to the concierge at the Four Seasons Paris. I was done being their doormat. The calls started flooding in as soon as their flight landed. My phone buzzed relentlessly as I unpacked my own suitcase, the one I'd carefully packed with outfits for each planned excursion, each dinner reservation, each museum visit. The irony wasn't lost on me as I hung up my business suits and placed my unworn walking shoes back on the shelf. The buzzing continued, filling my quiet house with its persistent vibration. I sighed, finally picking up the phone and glancing at the screen. Patricia's name flashed across it, accompanied by a barrage of missed calls and increasingly frantic texts. "Audrey, what's going on? The hotel won't let us check in. The reservation is missing. Call me immediately. Audrey, this isn't funny. Fix this now. Audrey, answer your phone." A laugh escaped me before I could stop it, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. Fix this? They really thought I'd swoop in and save the day after what they'd done. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Mackenzie. I let it ring out, only for her to leave a voicemail that perfectly captured her entitled attitude. "Audrey, this is so petty," she snapped, her voice shrill with indignation. "We're stuck at this gross airport hotel because of you. You need to call the Four Seasons and fix it now. I already posted about staying there on Instagram." I rolled my eyes and deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. For years, I'd been their fixer, the responsible one who smoothed over every mistake and picked up every slack. The one who'd helped Mackenzie with her college applications while she partied, who'd organized Harrison's surprise birthday party while Patricia took all the credit. Not anymore. Eventually, I decided to answer, if only to stop the endless barrage of calls. Patricia's voice hit me like a tidal wave of anger as soon as I picked up. "Audrey, what did you do? The hotel says all our reservations were canceled, and none of the tours are booked anymore." I let her rant for a moment, listening to the echo of airport announcements in the background. Then, with a calmness that surprised even me, I replied, "I canceled them." There was a long, stunned silence before she hissed, "Why would you do that?" The shock in her voice was almost comical, as if she couldn't fathom the consequences of her own actions. "Oh, I don't know," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm as I paced my living room. "Maybe because you decided to take Mackenzie on my trip? The one I spent 2 years planning and saving for? You're lucky I even drove you to the airport." "We thought you'd understand," she snapped, the familiar guilt-tripping tone creeping into her voice. In the background, I could hear Mackenzie's dramatic sighs and Harrison's murmured attempts to calm them both down. "Understand what?" I asked, my voice rising with each word. That years of saving and planning didn't matter because Mackenzie needed a break from her non-existent job search? That my hard work meant nothing to you? That after 15 years of trying to be part of this family, I'm still an outsider? Guess what, Mom? I don't understand, and I don't care to. I hung up before she could respond and turned my phone off, tossing it onto the couch. The silence that followed was blissful, and for the first time since that morning, I felt like I could breathe. If they wanted to prioritize Mackenzie, fine, but they could figure out their European adventure without my carefully planned itinerary. The silence lasted exactly 1 day. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing again with calls and messages from every member of my fractured family. At first, I ignored them, focusing instead on my work reports and the stack of medical equipment catalogs I needed to review. I spent the day cleaning my house and catching up on work presentations, but by evening, curiosity got the better of me. Taking a deep breath, I opened my phone and braced myself for the storm. The texts cascaded across my screen. From Patricia, "Audrey, you've gone too far. Your sister is in tears, and your father is furious. We can't get into any of the hotels you booked. Is this how I raised you to behave?" From Mackenzie, "You're acting like a child. I don't get why you're making this such a big deal. My Instagram followers were counting on those travel posts. Just fix it already." And finally, from Harrison, "We need to talk, sweetheart. This isn't right. Your mother is very upset." I set the phone down on my kitchen counter, shaking my head as I prepared my evening tea. For years, I'd been the one to fix things, to make sure everyone was comfortable and happy. The responsible medical sales rep who could always be counted on to smooth things over, just like I smoothed over deals with difficult clients. I poured hot water over my tea bag, watching the steam rise as I let the anger simmer. How dare they expect me to clean up their mess? How dare they act like I was the one in the wrong? The timer on my phone chimed, another call, right on schedule. Audrey. Patricia barked before I could even say hello. This isn't funny anymore. We're stranded at a terrible hotel. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth. Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for 2 years, planning every detail of a family vacation, only to be told you're not even part of the family anymore. Stop being dramatic, she snapped, her voice echoing in what sounded like a budget hotel lobby. Mackenzie needed this more than you. She's been having such a hard time with her job search. And now she can figure it out, I said firmly, walking to my home office where the canceled reservation confirmations still sat in my email inbox. You made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Mackenzie instead of me? Fine, but don't expect me to fund her luxury vacation while I sit at home alone. We're family, she hissed. The word family hit like a punch to the gut, the same word she'd used when she'd first married my father, promising we'd all be one happy unit. We don't do this to each other. I let out a bitter laugh, staring at the family photo on my desk, taken at my father's wedding to Patricia, before everything changed. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing. Mackenzie's voice came through the background, whining as always. Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible. I can't believe I have to stay in this gross hotel. That was the final straw. Enjoy your trip, I said, my tone glacial. Oh wait, you can't, because it's not your trip. It was mine, and now it's nobody's. Goodbye. I hung up before she could respond and turned my phone off again. For the rest of the evening, I felt an odd mix of anger and relief, anger that they'd put me in this position, but relief that I'd finally stood up for myself. They could call me dramatic all they wanted. For the first time since my father's remarriage, I wasn't letting them take advantage of me. The next few days were blissfully quiet. With my phone turned off, I finally had space to think clearly, free from the barrage of guilt trips and accusations. I spent my mornings on my back porch, sipping coffee and reviewing client presentations, finding peace in the routine I'd always loved, but Patricia had dismissed as working too hard. My afternoons were filled with sales calls and meetings, catching up on the medical equipment orders I'd slightly neglected while planning their trip. Each successful sale reminded me of how capable I was when I wasn't bogged down by their endless demands and Mackenzie's constant drama. By the third day, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone back on to find over a dozen voicemails waiting. Each one told its own story of entitlement and manipulation. The first few from Patricia, growing increasingly hysterical, Audrey, you need to call me back right now. This has gone too far. We're staying in a 2-star hotel. I can't believe you're doing this. You've humiliated us. We're your family. How could you treat us this way? Then came Mackenzie's messages, dripping with her usual entitled tone. This is so petty, even for you. My followers are asking why I'm not posting from the Four Seasons. You're ruining everything. I had to delete my Paris posts. Just fix it, Audrey. I can't believe you're being such a drama queen. And finally, Harrison's voice, quieter but no less pointed. Audrey, sweetie, I don't understand what's happened to you. Call us back so we can sort this out. Your mother is very upset. I hesitated before playing the final voicemail, a long one from Patricia. Her voice was quieter this time, tinged with frustration and exhaustion. "Audrey," she began, "we're back at the airport now. The trip is ruined, and I hope you're happy with yourself. Your sister is devastated, and your father and I are, well, disappointed doesn't even begin to cover it. Call us when you're ready to talk about your behavior." I deleted the voicemails without replying. I wasn't ready to talk, and honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of years of them putting Mackenzie first and expecting me to accept it with a smile. As I sat in my home office, surrounded by medical sales reports and client presentations, I found myself reflecting on all the times I'd been overlooked or dismissed, every holiday where Mackenzie's whims dictated the plans, every family gathering where my sales achievements were treated as afterthoughts while they fawned over Mackenzie's latest Instagram follower count. This trip had been the breaking point, but the cracks had been forming since that day 15 years ago when Patricia and Mackenzie first walked into our lives, promising to be the family we'd lost when my mother died. That evening, Ramona stopped by unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee from our favorite local cafe and an unmistakable look of curiosity. She'd been my closest friend since college, the one person who'd witnessed every step of my family's transformation. "I heard about what happened," she said, setting the coffee on my kitchen counter. "Patricia called me yesterday." Of course she had. My stepmother had always been good at recruiting allies when she wanted to guilt me into compliance. "And?" I asked, taking a sip of the perfectly made latte. Ramona's job as a counselor had taught her the value of listening without judgment, and right now, that's exactly what I needed. Ramona shrugged, a sly smile creeping across her face. "I told her you were probably busy with work and would get back to her when you were ready." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're the best." "No, you're the best," she said, her tone suddenly serious, "because you finally stood up for yourself. I know how hard that is, Audrey. Don't let them drag you back down." Her words stuck with me long after she left. Ramona was right. I'd spent too long bending over backward to please people who never seemed to care about my efforts. It was time to break that cycle once and for all. By the time the weekend rolled around, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The anger was still there, simmering under the surface, but it was joined by something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Freedom from their endless expectations, freedom from being the family's fixer, freedom to finally live on my own terms. But, as expected, the silence didn't last. It was Sunday afternoon, and I was reviewing proposals for a new line of cardiac monitors, when I finally got a call that I decided to answer. This time, it was Harrison. "Audrey," he began, his voice heavy with weariness, "your mother wanted me to call. She thinks you'll listen to me." "Go on," I said, leaning back in my office chair, looking at the sales awards lining my wall, achievements that had always seemed to pale in comparison to Mackenzie's social media successes. He let out a sigh. "Look, this has all gotten out of hand. Your mother's upset, Mackenzie's furious, and, well, it's just a mess. But you're better than this." I stiffened, his words igniting a fresh wave of anger. "Better than what, Dad? Standing up for myself? Refusing to let you walk all over me again?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly. "It's just, you've always been the reasonable one, the one who keeps everything together. This isn't like you." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You're right, it's not like me, because I'm not bending over backward to clean up your mess anymore." He paused, and for a moment, I thought he might finally understand, but then he said, "You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Is that really fair?" "Fair?" I repeated, rising from my desk chair to pace my office. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you and Patricia decided I wasn't important enough to be part of the trip I planned? Was it fair when you replaced me with Mackenzie like I didn't matter? Was it fair when you stood there in the airport and said nothing? That's not what we were trying to do, he said, his tone defensive now. We just thought Mackenzie needed it more. She's been struggling with her job search, and… Of course you did, I snapped, stopping in front of the window overlooking my carefully tended garden, another accomplishment Patricia had dismissed as a waste of time. You always think she needs more attention, more support, more of everything. And I'm always the one expected to sacrifice for her. Not anymore. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, he said, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't need you to say anything, I replied, my voice steady. I just need you to understand that I'm done being the afterthought. From now on, I come first in my own life. Audrey. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call and set the phone down, my hands trembling. For the rest of the day, I let myself feel everything: anger at their betrayal, sadness for the family relationship I'd tried so hard to build, and relief at finally standing my ground. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the start of something new. I wasn't the family's fixer anymore, and I wasn't going to be. When my father, Patricia, and Mackenzie finally returned, I was waiting for them at their house. I'd parked my Mercedes in their driveway, sipping coffee from my travel mug and feeling surprisingly calm as I watched their airport taxi pull up. As they stepped out, dragging their suitcases behind them, their faces were a mix of exhaustion and irritation. Mackenzie was the first to speak, her designer sunglasses now perched uselessly on her head in the evening light. Well, I hope you're happy, Audrey. Her voice carried across the manicured lawn her mother was so proud of. I raised an eyebrow, staying seated on the porch swing where I'd spent so many evenings as a teenager, before Patricia and Mackenzie entered our lives. Happy about what? Our trip was a disaster. Patricia snapped, waving her hand as if to brush away the entire fiasco. We spent the entire week staying in horrible hotels and eating terrible food because we couldn't afford anything decent. And don't get me started on the tours. Mackenzie chimed in, crossing her arms over her wrinkled designer blouse. Oh wait, there weren't any. Do you know how embarrassing it was to show up and be told there was no reservation? My Instagram is ruined. I took another sip of coffee, letting their complaints wash over me. Sounds rough, I said finally, my voice calm. But you wanted to take Mackenzie, remember? I'm sure you all had some great bonding time. That's not the point. Patricia shot back, her voice rising to that familiar pitch she used when things weren't going her way. You knew we couldn't afford all the things you'd planned. You set us up to fail. I stood up, setting my mug down on the small table next to the porch swing. No, Mom, I didn't set you up for anything. I planned a trip for the four of us, something special I'd been saving for years. You're the ones who decided to cut me out at the last second. Harrison finally spoke up, his tone quieter but no less accusatory. You didn't have to cancel everything, Audrey. That was extreme. Was it? I asked, folding my arms. Why should I have paid for a trip I wasn't even invited to? If Mackenzie needed it so badly, you should have planned it yourselves. You're lucky I didn't cancel the return flight. Mackenzie rolled her eyes, pulling out her phone as if to check her social media notifications. You're so dramatic. It's just money, Audrey. And you're so entitled. I shot back, my carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea how much work and sacrifice went into planning that trip? Or do you just assume things magically appear for you because someone else takes care of it? They stood there, stunned into silence by my outburst. The evening sun cast long shadows across the driveway as I continued, my voice steady but firm. I've spent years being the responsible one, I said, gesturing to my medical sales awards visible through my car window. The one who fixes things, plans things, makes sure everything runs smoothly. And you've spent just as long taking it all for granted. That's not fair, Patricia started, but I held up a hand to stop her. No, Mom, what's not fair is how you treated me. You chose Mackenzie over me, like always, so I chose to stop being your doormat. You didn't want me on the trip? Fine, but you don't get to enjoy the benefits of my hard work without me. I grabbed my bag from the porch swing and turned to leave. I'm glad you're back safely, but don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I'm done. As I walked to my car, I heard them calling after me, their voices a mix of anger and guilt, but I didn't look back. The drive home from my parents' house felt strange, peaceful. For years, every visit had left me emotionally drained, especially after client meetings and sales presentations, but this time I felt lighter. When I got back to my house, I made a cup of tea and sat on my couch, replaying the confrontation in my head. They'd been so sure I'd fold, that I'd given like always, but watching their stunned faces as I walked away was a reminder of how much I'd changed. They could be angry, hurt, or embarrassed, it didn't matter anymore. I was done living my life to meet their expectations. Picking up my phone, I saw a text from Ramona. How did it go? I did it, I replied. I finally stood up for myself. Proud of you, she texted back. Dinner tomorrow? Absolutely, I responded, smiling for the first time that evening. The next day, I got a call from Ramona during my lunch break between client meetings. So tell me everything, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. How are you feeling after yesterday? I laughed, leaning back in my office chair. Exactly like you'd imagine. They're furious. Mackenzie's pouting about her ruined social media plans, and Patricia is probably trying to figure out how to guilt me back into line. Ramona let out a snort. Let her try. You've got a backbone now, and I'm here to make sure it stays in place. I grinned, grateful for her unwavering support. Thanks, Ramona. I mean it. You've been my rock through all of this. Anytime, she said, her voice softening. So, what's next for you now that you're not playing family fixer anymore? That question had been circling in my mind since the confrontation. What was next? For years, so much of my energy had been poured into trying to please my family, trying to earn their approval. Now that I'd let go of that burden, the possibilities felt endless and a little intimidating. I don't know yet, I admitted, looking at the travel brochures still sitting on my desk. But I feel like I get to decide. Not them, not anyone else, just me. Sounds like the start of something amazing, Ramona said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Maybe we could plan that trip to Italy you always talked about? Maybe, I replied, already feeling a spark of excitement. But this time, I'll be planning it for someone who actually appreciates it. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes that felt big in their own way. I redecorated my home office, replacing the family photos with artwork I'd always loved but Patricia had called too modern. I spent weekends exploring Chicago's medical technology conventions and local parks, things I'd always meant to do but never made time for between family obligations and Mackenzie's endless crises. I started journaling too, writing down my thoughts and dreams without filtering them through the lens of what my family might think. Each small step felt like reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. One evening, I sat down with my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd used to plan their trip. The canceled reservations stared back at me, but this time I didn't feel a pang of regret. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. That money had been meant for a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I wasn't going to let it go to waste. Closing the spreadsheet, I opened a new browser tab and typed solo travel ideas. A few weeks later, I booked a trip to Italy, not the same itinerary I'd planned for them, but something entirely my own. This wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was for me, a chance to celebrate my independence and finally put myself first. The moment I landed in Rome, I felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. I'd never traveled alone before, but as I stepped out of the airport and into the bustling city, I knew I'd made the right decision. Between meetings with European medical equipment suppliers, I spent my days wandering cobblestone streets, marveling at ancient ruins, and indulging in meals at charming little cafes. There was no schedule to keep, no one else's preferences to consider, just me and the freedom to do exactly what I wanted. One afternoon, while sitting on the Spanish steps with a gelato in hand, I pulled out the journal I'd brought with me. For years, I'd written about what I wanted to achieve, but those dreams were always wrapped up in making someone else happy, organizing family events, supporting Mackenzie's latest schemes, trying to earn Patricia's approval. Now, as I wrote, the focus shifted. Learn Italian. Expand my medical sales territory. Travel to at least 5 more countries. Start my own medical equipment consulting firm. The list grew, each goal a reflection of the life I wanted to create, not the one I'd been expected to live. On my last night in Florence, I had dinner at a small, family-run restaurant overlooking the Arno River. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of peace. This trip had been more than just a vacation, it was a turning point. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my family's approval, but here, thousands of miles away, I realized something important. I didn't need it. I was enough, just as I was. When I returned home, my phone showed several missed calls from Patricia and Mackenzie, this time with softer tones and carefully worded messages. "Hope you had a nice trip," one text from Patricia read. "Maybe we can all talk soon." I stared at the message for a moment before setting my phone down. I wasn't ready to reply, and that was okay. This time, it would be on my terms. As I unpacked my suitcase and placed souvenirs on my shelves, including a small replica of the Colosseum for my office, I felt a sense of pride. For the first time in 15 years, I was living life on my own terms, and it felt absolutely right.